We pray the Lord will keep his hand on all we do as we continue to impact the Jewish people with the truth about Messiah Yeshua until the day all Israel will be saved. Romans 11:26. Welcome everyone to another episode of PEP Talk, the Persuasive Evangelism podcast from Solas. I'm Simon Wenham, and I have the pleasure of co-hosting today again with my learned colleague, Gavin Matthews. Gavin, how are things with you?
I haven't been called learned before. This is a new development, so I'm willing to take that. Thank you, Simon.
You're very welcome. I think you and Christy, I seem to use adjectives for. I think I probably need to be a bit more consistent, don't I? And I think I'll need a thesaurus sometime soon as well. But
no, she is learned. You can use that for Christy, maybe not for me.
Absolutely. Well, I think you both are. But we should move on to another learned person we have on the show today. This morning's opening quote has hopefully given us a bit of a clue as to what today's conversation is going to be. One disappointment is we are only audio, and you can't actually see that behind our guest today is a wonderful Torah scroll, and we can see it, and I'm afraid you can't. But it is probably the best backdrop we've had to a guest so far on the show. So thank you so much for that. But I'm delighted to welcome our guest, who is Eime, who is Director of CMJ UK, the Church's ministry among Jewish people. Aaron, thank you so much for being with us. Could you perhaps start us off by just saying where you are and how you first got involved with evangelism in the first place?
Absolutely. Simon, Gavin, great to meet you. Shalom, everyone. Right. I am currently in the sunny city of Nottingham, and it actually is sunny in this part of the world for right now. I have not always been here in Nottingham. I've spent 26 years working with CMJ in Jerusalem, Israel, where my family sort of grew and raised. I had all my children born there. My son was born in a very small town. You probably haven't heard of it, Bethlehem. Yeah, you have heard of it. Okay, well, now you know somebody else famous born in Bethlehem. And living and working in the Middle East and falling in love with with the Jewish people and God's the apple of his eye, as he calls them, has sort of propelled me into learning, giving me courage to share my faith and to encourage other brothers and sisters in the church not to be scared to share the faith of Jesus Yeshua as the Jewish Messiah.
Wonderful. Obviously, different times, different seasons. At the moment, the state of Israel is in the news every night because of what's been going on in Gaza and now in Iran as well. And you're at the forefront of interaction between Christians and Jewish people. How does that kind of backdrop of what's going on in the world affect Christians trying to share their faith with Jewish people, particularly here in the UK, where politics is the backdrop on which we're doing a lot of this kind of work?
Yeah, let me just start beginning. It sure doesn't help. What we find is people often superimpose politics and modern day morality and ethics back into the Bible and often into their Christian walk. And that's actually not right. In fact, it's got to be the other way. We actually should have the Bible speaking into every aspect of our lives, including our relationship with government and the people groups around us, and therefore God's people, the Jewish people. And so there is this tension that we find. We find people reticent to talk about it. We because of war and because of persecution, people even seem reticent to even share their faith, as though the truth might set them free, but they don't. They think that might be superimposing their reality or their ethics on someone. And so if there's anything I would like to do, it's like, no, the truth sets you free. Share the truth, bring the light, and you'll find that actually it'll reflect back. The prophet says, arise, shine, for your light has come. So the light came, and then the prophet turns around and says, arise, now you shine. There is this thing where we can reflect the glory back to the Jewish people. Does not Simeon say when he picks up Jesus, this is the light to the Gentiles and the glory of Israel?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. And obviously, for those who perhaps don't know, there are Messianic Jewish people who believe that Jesus is the Messiah. Can you say anything about whether that number is growing around the world? And do you have any stories? It might be interesting just to hear a couple of short ones of people coming to faith, if that is the case. Because we probably don't know the numbers ourselves.
Well, when people turn the TV on and they look through the internet or scroll the newspapers, anything coming out of the Middle East is bad news. And having lived there for 26 years, I don't see bad news. I see good news. And so let's have some. Let's have some good news. When I first went to Israel in 1998, then I arrived young, naive, in the Holy Land. They had taken a census and they had counted approximately 5,000 to 7,000 Jewish believers or Messianics, Meshichim, Jewish Christians in the Holy Land. And they took another census in 2021, and that number had risen to between 30 and 35,000, which means the Jewish church, or the number of Jewish believers in the Messiah, had grown by 5 times in 20 years. Anyone who's listening now, sit back, close your eyes and go, oh, I wish my church had grown by 5 times in 20 years. Well, I got to see that. I got to live that. I got to participate on it. And that is good news. Newspapers won't tell you. So sometimes we will get challenged and they'll say, but Jewish people don't believe, they've rejected Jesus. And you go, really? Actually, if you take a census of the number of Jewish Christians in the church, you'll discover it's approximately 1.6 million around the world. Now, that means that is 10% of the Jewish world. How much of Japan is Christian? 1%. How much of Australia is Christian? 8%. How much of England is Christian? Suddenly you realize that actually Yeshua, the Messiah, within his ethnic people group is not doing that bad.
Oh, that's really interesting. And when Christian people kind of meet Jewish people in the UK, they're not monocultural by any means, are they? We meet kind of some people who are very orthodox, other people that take a much more liberal position, and also you meet a lot of Jews who are atheists. So how do we relate the gospel to all these different types of people, and are they different in their reception and when they hear the gospel? Tell us something about that.
Just like any people group, there's being homogenous doesn't really actually isn't really true. I remember going to Israel, in 1998, and I thought, I'm going to love it. I'm going to get to the Holy Land, and everyone's going to know God, and I'm going to just talk about God everywhere I go. It's going to be absolutely beautiful. My goodness, paradise. And you get to Tel Aviv, and you go, what a bunch of pagans, right? You've got secularism, but then coming from Australia, that's what you're going to find there too. But you come to England, and you have this incredible variety of Jewish people here too. You've got the secular, the chilunim, those that are ethnically Jewish, and culturally maybe, but in terms of faith and practice, no. But you also have an area called Gateshead up in the north, and that is a center for Hasidic Jewish religious life and training. In fact, there are 3 places on the planet. If you're going to send your son to learn Torah and learn the Bible, you will either go to Jerusalem or New York or Gateshead. Who knew? So in this country, you will find some of the most amazing hachamim, some of the most amazing wise sages. At the same time, you'll meet secular Jews who believe in absolutely nothing. So away you go.
And so would you find some of those more receptive than others, or is it you just can't generalize? Or
that's a good question. So I found that actually in Israel, Jewish people by and large were a lot more engaging with the gospel. Now, why would that be? I would think that it goes something like this. Jewish people in Israel are much more comfortable in their Jewishness. They're in Israel. They've had all kinds of troubles in there. They've gone through economic disasters, wars. The world hates them, and yet they remain, and they feel more comfortable to be able to explore. So Israelis do. They explore. They go around the world. You'll find them in the jungles of Mexico, the mountains of Nepal, the beaches of Australia. They will go and visit different religions and ask, what do you do? Can I eat it, drink it, taste it, join in? And so when they come to meet Christians in Israel, they go, "What do you guys believe? What do you do? Explain this to me." But here in the United Kingdom, then we are shaped by a history. The Bible is sacred history of a people. After the Bible, you've got this tension between church and synagogue, which has unfortunately not been very always helpful, and positives and negatives, highs and lows. And with the rising tide of anti-Semitism inside the church, you've got a reticence for engagement in either dialogue or even just being in the same room, and that is really sad, and that is an incredible obstacle to sharing the light in this country.
If you're enjoying today's podcast, would you carefully consider supporting the ministry of Solas? We do all kinds of work in evangelism and evangelism training and creating resources all over the UK, working with all kinds of churches to share the gospel. If you'd be willing to support us for as little as £4 a month, we will send you 2 copies of our book, Have You Ever Wondered? One for you to read and one for you to give away to someone who isn't yet a Christian. Hop over to our website, solas, solas-cpc.org, and look for the donate button at the bottom of the page. Thank you so much for considering supporting the ministry. And now, back to the program. If you have a Jewish colleague or neighbor, or your uncle's got a Jewish wife and you're in the same room, what sort of suggestions would you have of where would you start a conversation that's going to lead to a spiritual conversation that will lead ultimately to Christ and the gospel? What's the way in? What are helpful, or maybe what are unhelpful ways of starting conversations with Jewish people that you've tried and tested?
Yeah. Okay. So let's do this. In the Bible, in the ancient world, and actually in modern day Judaism, telling stories is really important. By the way, we love it too. We just call them sermons, okay? But you have them. Let me tell you a story. So in 2012, Hamas figured out how to shoot rockets at Jerusalem. It was like the first time they ever did. And on a Thursday, I remember it very clearly, 10 o'clock, we got this siren sounding, which said that there were 5 incoming rockets to Jerusalem, and we had to go to our bomb shelters, which in Hebrew is called the miklat, which is the same word for city of refuge that you find in Leviticus. Interesting how modern Hebrew and biblical Hebrew overlap like that. As we're making our way to the bomb shelter, these 2 Orthodox boys, you know what the yeshiva students look like? The long little peyot, the ringlets on their hair, black, white. They ran onto the compound, onto Christchurch, and said, "Can we hide in your miklat?" I said, "Yes, of course, come in." So now you had these 2 Orthodox boys trapped inside a room with about 50 Christians. And you're going, "Well, what shall we talk about?" "Well, we're going to be here for 5-10 minutes. Let's have a conversation." And as we began to talk, we started with, "What about this prophecy? And have you read this in the Bible?" We discovered that these young men didn't actually believe anything. They were just culturally Jews going through the motions. And we looked at each other going, wow, if we can't quote a Bible verse, what do we do? And we came to this. Peter, in his epistle, says, and it's a great sentence, he says, "Always be prepared to give a reason for the hope that you have." And Paul had summed up all of Christianity, all of faith, all of the Judeo-Christian values into 3 words: faith, hope, love. And of course, the greatest of these is love, which is, what a great sermon that one is. But the world we live in doesn't care about your faith. They go, "Oh, look, you and Yeshua, you and Jesus, that's great. I'm glad you've got a nice reality. Me and my crystals, we're going to sit over here. Me and the Torah, we're going to sit over here. Don't impose your reality on me." We don't need to give a reason for the love. Simon, no one's ever going to go up to you and say, "Simon, why are you such a nice guy? Please stop that." Okay? It's not going to happen. However, if you don't believe in anything, what do you hope for? This world, our culture, our economy, everything that goes on gives you no hope. So we looked at these young men and we said, "Guys, you're hopeless. What? Yeah, everybody blame everything for you. There's no potatoes in Ireland. It's your fault. Okay, they run out of vodka in Russia. Definitely the Jews. Okay, you pick a problem in the world. It's you guys. It says you're hopeless. But can you see that we don't believe that? We actually believe that the Messiah is sitting on the throne. We believe God's in control. We have a fire in our eyes, and we believe it will get better. And so after they left, I got a phone call from a guy called Boaz. One of the guys was called Boaz. I got a phone call from his mother, and I thought I was going to get absolutely blasted. I thought, okay, that's it. My ear's going to melt. I'm going to get chewed off. I was ready for it. But instead what I got was, what did you tell my son that made him smile? And so I think, friends, whoever you are, share the hope that you have, that the fact that Yeshua, Jesus, is the Messiah. He's sitting on the throne. He is coming back. He will make it better. And people will go, who are you people? Like, why do you think that way? He says, actually, it all comes from your scriptures. I wonder why you don't have such a hope. And you can get into an amazing conversation just by that. And so listen to what Peter says to us. Be prepared at all times to give a reason for the hope that you have.
That's very interesting. And so I suppose, so one of our questions was simply about the sort of theological engagement and what sort of angle you go through. So do you think that is the best approach? Because that's an interesting one for, as in non-Jewish people as well, isn't it? But you think so that is where you would go down. And is there less sort of pushback in terms of we don't accept your authority or things like that?
Yes. So once you're beginning, you're talking about a concept. So Judaism talks in concepts as well as scriptures. Eventually, you will have to deal with the scriptures. So, after you've gone from the concept, is there a God? Is there a hope? Where does evil come from? What does a fall mean? What am I being saved from and to, et cetera, et cetera. Then eventually they're going to come down to, we Jewish people, we don't believe in Jesus is the Messiah. Yes, I know that. You've got other messiahs, haven't you? You've got Menachem Schneerson, he's a messiah. You've got Rabbi Nachman, he's a messiah. Shabtai Tzvi's been a messiah. You only have to wait like 10 years. Well, there'll be another one because Messiah is a Jewish concept. It is not a Gentile one. Us Gentiles, we're off worshiping the sun, the moon, and the stars. We do gurus and mountaintop experiences. Redeemer figures, that comes from the Hebrew scriptures. And there is this strong theme in the Hebrew scriptures that God is really keen to redeem his world. He's really keen to have a relationship with his people. And so then you might get into some discussions on, but we don't believe that Messiah is divine. Says, okay, that's a great concept. It's a really hard one, even for Christians to try and wrap our heads around. Okay, I get it. There's this special day in the church calendar called Trinity Sunday. It's the day of the year pastors have to get up and talk about the Trinity. You talk about the Trinity longer than 5 minutes, it's called heresy. Okay, you just can't figure out what to say. But you can go into the scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures, and you can find mystery. You see, in the Western world, we want to solve everything. Right? We get a mystery and we want to solve it. We watch a murder mystery show, and if we haven't solved it at the end, we will call the studio and complain. Right? But in the Bible, you have a mystery, and it takes time to meditate. King David says, "I meditate on your word day and night." So we go into the Hebrew scriptures with Jewish people, and we meditate on the mystery. Who is the figure seen in Isaiah? When you get to Isaiah 48 and you come to verses 12 to 16, who is this person called the first and the last who makes the world? Yet God sends him. How can that possibly be? Why do the prophets seem to refer to a conquering king and a suffering servant? Who is this who rides in on a donkey? There are these mysteries that we can wrestle with, and you don't need to push. In fact, you probably shouldn't. You should go gently and just constantly wrestle with the mystery.
Oh, that's great. That's good stuff. And I wonder if we could just pivot the conversation slightly as we kind of, move into the last little bit of this podcast, from thinking about the people that we're speaking to thinking about us who do the speaking about Christ. The suggestion was made by someone that evangelism amongst Jewish people is best left to people who are Jewish Christians. Is there a role for engrafted branches like the rest of us of
Okay.
sharing the gospel with Jewish people? Tell us how that works. Because a lot of missionaries would say they've really made a breakthrough when the gospel takes root in a culture and people are sharing peer-to-peer within the culture and they can go home again. What are your thoughts on that issue?
Okay. So I think... So in terms of like missionary history, let's think about it. The gospel started, the good news of Jesus the Messiah started with a group of Jews. Yeah. And that Jewish world went out and approached the Gentile world. And then as it grew, then obviously, because there's more Gentiles than Jews, it was always going to be the plan that Gentiles were part of the story. In fact, they always were. When God brought his people out of Egypt, who came with them? A mixed multitude. Jews and Gentiles are part of the Passover Exodus. Jews and Gentiles are at Mount Sinai. Jews and Gentiles are building the tabernacle for God to dwell with them. So it's always been together. The fact is, the majority, 80% of Jewish people who come to faith in Jesus as the Messiah do so through a Gentile friend. That is a fact. Now, it might be slightly different in Israel in the effect that as Jewish people who come to faith in the Messiah, they're Israelis. They join the army, they get careers, they become doctors and lawyers. They're everywhere now. So that contact is great. But for Jewish people living in the United Kingdom, their contact with the Messiah will be through a Gentile. So for our friends who are listening, don't be scared to share your hope. You are the gateway to the kingdom of heaven.
And absolutely. And so in terms of actually building those bridges, you mentioned the sort of anti-Semitism and that actually shutting people down. Do you have any sort of practical advice about how to build bridges in a way that enables you to get to that point of conversation?
So Christians, I can't remember where the quote come from, but Christians should be the last people criticizing Jewish people out loud like this. Okay, in fact, one of the things the church should be doing is standing up against anti-Semitism and showing the Jewish people that we are actually a friend. Not only a friend, we acknowledge, as Paul did, that it is the roots supporting us. And I think, well, I know, if you engage in combating anti-Semitism, you will find Jewish people coming to talk to you. They will say, thank you very much. Thank you for being my voice. I find it very scared, or I find myself, a little alone. Who comes to help me? And it has to be us. It must be us. And so I think we need to church, I think we need to make our voice heard a lot more in the public sphere against anti-Semitism.
Mm-hmm. And the organization you work for is CMJ. Tell us just a little bit about what you're doing and the kind of work that you're doing, and maybe something about where the work is up to today, how it's changed over the last few years. Where is it up to at the moment?
This is a 217-year-old mission. It began, some people probably don't know this, with a guy called William Wilberforce. So at the same time as he was passionate about getting rid of slavery, he was just as passionate about God's calling for the Jewish people. And also the challenge was to turn around to the church and say, hey, do you know that the book that you read, it didn't come out of a vacuum. It comes from a Hebraic world. It comes from a special land and a time and a place. So let's hear again the words of Jesus, just like the Jewish disciples do. So the society started in London. It spread around the world, wherever you found a Jewish community, from Morocco all the way through to Persia and into China. It's still around the world in centers like Canada, America, Australia. There's even branches in India and Israel and here in the United Kingdom and Ireland. Our work involves engaging with Jewish people and standing with them, discussing with them, talking with them. I myself study with a group of rabbis twice a week, and encouraging the church, especially ones that live in Jewish areas, get involved with the Jewish community. Don't hide. Don't run away. In fact, go out and share your hope. And then also to educate the church in the Jewish roots of the faith. That is, to hear again the message of Yeshua, of Jesus, as a Jewish disciple would. So putting the Bible back into its context. We do that all over the United Kingdom and around the world. And more recently, using social media, because that seems to be the dynamic that we get a chance to speak now. So here we are again, using that medium. We're using more of that now.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, technology can definitely be good in those ways. I agree. I'm actually still really struck about your comment about New York, Jerusalem, and Gateshead going together, which has got me thinking about lots of things. But I wondered if I could just ask one final question, which I think is relevant. And that is that I think there is a reticence among some Christians about evangelism towards Jewish people because it's wrapped up for some with a end times theology. And of course, some Christians hold this, but others are slightly wary of that. And I wondered if you could perhaps just help us navigate that as Christians, what you think about that. And I'm sorry if that's a really big question to finish us off with.
Great question, Simon. And I'm glad you brought it up because I would like to talk about it and I had forgotten. We discovered that for some Jewish people in Israel, they would come to us and say, the only reason you Christians like us is you want Israel back in the land of Israel, so Jesus come back. It's a selfish. Your love for us is selfish. And that cannot be the heart of Jesus at all. In fact, Jesus's heart was selfless. And we need to be more like that. We need to say, you know what? God, Paul wrestled with the mystery of Israel in Romans. Okay, anyone can read Romans 9, 10, and 11. I like the way he starts his preface by saying, to them belong the covenants. And that is in present tense Greek, right? And I'm not a Greek scholar, but I do know that is present tense. And Paul says, they're still loved. God still has a plan. Do I understand it? Not 100%. Is Yeshua the Messiah? Yes, let's go. And he starts to explore. We need to not approach Jewish people as either numbers or just units of, we'll just get them over here. They'll become good little Christian farmers. Then Jesus will come back and they'll build the temple. It's like, some of this might happen, but you know what? That's got nothing to do with us. That has to, our function is to answer the call of the Mashiach, the call of the Messiah, to be lights to the nations. He sent the people out from Jerusalem, and we need to continue to follow that pattern and acknowledging, as Paul does, that Messiah is a Jewish concept. The most natural thing for Jewish people is to believe in a Messiah. And so share your hope, share your thoughts, share your desire, and let God and in the kingdom of heaven fix it all up. Remember, the disciples asked him after the resurrection, you're going to restore the kingdom to Israel? And he turned around and said, it's not for you to know right now. So go get busy with the program.
Wonderful. I think that's a brilliant note to draw it to a conclusion on. Aaron, thank you so much for sharing with us. That was fascinating. We could talk for another 3 hours about this stuff. Thank you, Simon. I'd really like to close this, but by just reading that quote from Romans 9 that you mentioned a second ago. Let's finish with Paul's words. He says, I have great sorrow and unceasing anguish in my heart, for I wish that I myself were cursed and cut off from Christ for the sake of my people, those of my own race, the people of Israel. Theirs is the adoption to sonship. Theirs the divine glory, the covenants, the receiving of the law, the temple worship, and the promises. Theirs are the patriarchs, and from them is traced the human ancestry of the Messiah, who is God over all, forever praised. Amen.
Amen.